My name is Nick Gallant, and we've been running this series for about 15 years. And I've been chairing, convening these events for the past 6 years, and it's been a great pleasure. And what we tend to do at these events is invite speakers from the world of research or practice to present what they do, their research, their projects, or whatever it might be, to an audience of which normally comprises students, members of staff, and others connected to the Bartlett School of Planning community. Our speaker for this evening is David Joyce. So David has had a long, I think I can say long, can't I, David? A distinguished career in London local government. So following periods at the Thames Gateway boroughs of Redbridge and Barking and Dagenham, he spent 10 years at Camden Council overseeing projects including the regeneration of King's Cross and high-speed 2's contested Euston redevelopment. He then had periods at Lambeth, leading on transformations at Vauxhall, Elms, Waterloo and Brixton, and at Haringey, setting up an ALMO, leading on council house building and overseeing regeneration at Tottenham and Wood Green. So his current role, David is Corporate Director of Housing and Regeneration at Tower Hamlets, where he has overseen a significant pipeline of new development, including council-led direct delivery of housing, the construction of a new European headquarters for JP Morgan in the borough, and ongoing developments in the Lower Lea Valley Creative Enterprise Zone, where he's leading a team that aims to deliver new homes and jobs alongside a sustainable future for Tower Hamlets' many small and medium-sized enterprises. But I've saved the best bit for last, because David is also an alumni of the Bartlett School of Planning. He graduated, I think, in 2001 with the MPhil Town Planning, and I was course director.
Yes.
So I've known David for a long time, but this is the first time, I hadn't seen you for 25 years. So it's been really great to catch up this evening. So the MPhil Town Planning actually evolved into our current programme, the MSc Spatial Planning. And we were talking earlier, and David reminded me that he actually spent a little bit of time following graduation working with Matthew and I on the report we did for the Royal Town Planning Institute on the relationship between house builders and planners and how it can be better. So in a parallel universe, David is currently an academic, probably introducing this lecture this evening. But in reality, he spent the last 25 years building up substantial experience of planning in London. Hence, that's the subject of his lecture this evening, delivering placemaking and housing in central London locations. So there will be a chance to ask questions at the end, and we will have a small reception as well. But David, welcome back to UCL after all this time, and over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Nick, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be back at UCL. I have been away for 25 years, but because I worked at Camden Council, I've been back a lot, dealing with lots of applications for the expansion of UCL's estate within Camden, which was always highly charged and difficult because it's a difficult context to try and develop in. But walking around with Nick tonight, I've seen some really nice outcomes from a lot of those planning applications, and definitely looks like an improved student experience. Although I was reflecting with Nick, when I came here, I think there was 10,000 students, and now the number is something like 60,000, and he's told me there's 10,000 members of staff, which blew my mind. It shows how cities and institutions that make cities up change rapidly, because that's not really a long period of time when you think about it. So yeah, thank you for inviting me to do this lecture tonight. I'm not an academic. I think I'm the first one in the series not to be a professor, so apologies if it's a bit more basic than you'll be used to. But I suppose I want to give a sort of practitioner's view, really. In my time of 25 years of working in local government since I graduated from UCL, I have worked exclusively in London. So what I offer tonight is definitely a London-centric sort of view. So apologies for people that might be looking for that wider view. But I think nonetheless, I hope I can bring something of interest tonight. So I'm gonna start by just reflecting on some of the biggest things that I've worked on in my career, and what you see here is 3 sets of before and after pictures of major regeneration schemes in London that I've worked on. You will recognise them. So in the first column, if you like, is obviously King's Cross. In the second column, you've got Vauxhall, 9 Elms, Battersea Power Station, and the third column is the one that hasn't happened, which is the High Road West scheme next to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So I'll just talk a little bit about those before I sort of really get into more about what's happening now, what the challenges are now. So I think for me, one of the big things about King's Cross is that we studied it on the course when I came to UCL. And I remember at the time our lecturers saying to us, I can't remember who it was that ran that bit of the course, but saying to us, actually, King's Cross at that point had been a regeneration scheme which had had 20 years of work on it. But actually, at the point, we were wandering around the site, taking pictures of urban decay and some remaining nightclubs. And, actually, it hadn't taken off despite 20 years of planning and community engagement. And actually, 25 years later, and I had the privilege of working on various phases of King's Cross, it's still not finished. So I think the first thing is that big regeneration at that scale takes a long, long time. And in this case, probably the best part of 50 years, actually. The second part of it from King's Cross for me is it really did take partnership between landowners, between different bits of the public sector, and a clear vision that people stuck to. And I often think when you read books about King's Cross, the role of the public sector is a bit underplayed, I would say that. I think the role of Camden Council is somewhat underplayed. And I don't necessarily include my own role in that because I think I joined Camden in 2006 and the scheme already had outline planning permission. So the work at Camden had been going on for years before I arrived. But what I mean by that is that actually the public sector played a huge role in getting that scheme through the various economic cycles. So for instance, the scheme was just getting going in terms of being implemented at the time of the financial crash in around 2008, if I'm getting my timing right. And it was in danger of falling over. The landowners, King's Cross Railway Lands Group, had selected Argent as the development partner. And the thing that kept it going was kickstart money from the government to build the early phases of the affordable housing. And actually also a little forgotten fact, the first big office occupier in the King's Cross development, and it's often forgotten now, was Camden Council, who bought one of the buildings on King's Cross. And it probably wouldn't be the target market today, alongside the Googles, the Facebooks, the Universal Records. But actually, Camden Council buying that building was I'm told, crucial to the cash flow of that whole scheme and making sure it didn't fall over. So I actually think there was a huge role there. But probably the most significant role that Camden played was providing that clear master plan and holding all the different parts to account, and also doing the community engagement that led to it. So, often now it's celebrated as a great success story of regeneration. Debate that. I'm sure there's been lots of debates about that in places like this. But actually, a lot of the reasons it's celebrated, for instance, the heritage, would not, I believe, have happened without a very clear position from Camden Council about which buildings, and they had to make compromises as well, I will say. Not every building that they wanted to retain as part of the scheme was retained. A lot of negotiation to get to where we got to now. And some key things happened, like the University of the Arts moving into the scheme. That was a massive catalyst. I remember being there when the University of the Arts opened and in King's Cross, and it just felt like the whole area changed. Suddenly Gray's Inn Road started smartening up and all these trendy people were hanging out in King's Cross, which just didn't happen before. So some key catalysts happened, and equally other decisions could have been made about where the University of the Arts wanted to move, and it may not have been the great success it is today. Whilst I was director at Camden, I invited back some of the real architects of King's Cross, like Bob West and Anne Doherty, who had been Director of Planning at the time. And we stood up in Camden's new, now built building and looked out at the site. And they were quite proud of, actually, the fact that what they had envisaged with the developers and the architects was built out. But I think everyone reflected perhaps it was a lot more high-end than they expected. Things like Cold Drops Yard, the retail offering, was that, and I remember working on the Euston development with the local community and going out with young people on a project we were doing about what did they want from the Euston development, and they all to a person said that they didn't feel King's Cross was for them. So even though I think it is a success as a project and lots of great stuff's come out of it, I don't think it works for everyone. So that's King's Cross. The second one is Vauxhall 9 Elms, and it's so different because there was virtually no public sector land involved in Vauxhall 9 Elms. There was very disparate land ownerships. When I got to Lambeth Council, the GLA had published an opportunity area planning framework that very much set the heights of the buildings there, which is a matter of a lot of controversy, a lot of public inquiries, impacts on World Heritage Site views, and all sorts of other dimensions to it. But I think what I would say is, and now actually when you go there, there's been huge progress in building Vauxhall 9 Elms out. There was again partnership working at the heart of it. And when I worked for Lambeth, we had a Labour leader, who you will know, Steve Reid, and followed by Lib Peck, who worked really well with the next door borough, which was Wandsworth, at the time Conservative led by Ravi Govindia. But the work between the two boroughs was really effective. Very different objectives. Wandsworth wanted the Northern Line extension. For Lambeth, it was about affordable housing and other sort of local benefits that we were trying to secure, but a sort of shared understanding about how to do that and how to work it and have a clear vision about the linear park that spanned both boroughs and delivering against that. I think, again, there are lots of things that you can look back on and say, am I proud of everything in that development? Probably not. But I do think you have to make a lot of compromises to make stuff happen. I know it's an obvious point to make, but I turn to the third scheme to sort of really make the point, which is High Road West. So this is a large estate regeneration scheme directly opposite the Spurs Stadium, which when I arrived at Haringey was newly opened. And it did pain me because as an Arsenal fan, I have to admit, it is the best stadium I've been in by some distance. It is a different level. And if you haven't been, I suggest you visit. It's also kind of made North Tottenham a bit of a destination because there's a lot of other things going on in that stadium, like a Formula One e-karting track, for instance, and I could name 100 other examples. But they were a very difficult neighbour and a very difficult stakeholder for Haringey Council to work with. So our vision for the Love Lane estate was to regenerate it and the industrial land to the north and build around 2,700 homes. And we'd done a lot of public consultation. We won a estate ballot with residents, slightly closer than a lot of other estate ballots, I will say. But and we were keen to get on with it. But actually, our noisy neighbour, Spurs, were determined to stop us. They had a very different vision. Daniel Levy, the chairperson of Spurs, former chairperson, he did not share the vision of housing and was very unhappy about the kind of emphasis on council housing that Haringey had at the time I was there. He had a very different vision, and actually it was our land. So he wasn't able to stop us, but he was able to delay and frustrate us. We ended up in a public inquiry on the compulsory purchase order that we wanted to do to buy up some of the shop units and some of the leasehold flats. We ended up with him legally challenging, unsuccessfully, I will say, the planning decision that we made as a council. But I think the learning for me was, if you don't have your local stakeholders on board, it becomes so much harder to do things. If you don't have compromise, and in that case, neither the council or Spurs were willing to compromise on our competing visions for the site, things don't happen. And I am quite sad, actually, because there's still not a single home built at High Road West, and the residents who are in overcrowded accommodation and really substandard accommodation and who voted for that scheme are still waiting for their new homes. So for me, it's just, I suppose, 25 years into local government, it's just a little bit of a reflection on, I've been involved in some things that have happened, I've been involved in some things that haven't happened. And I think what it shows is councils can't do things by themselves, even when they do own the land, because we missed the economic cycle, really. And by the time we got through all those challenges, Lend-Lease decided they wanted to retreat from the UK as well, so they were our development partner, and suddenly, the scheme needs a completely different future. The viability challenge had increased substantially. So I think they'll get there eventually with this scheme, and Daniel Levy has left Spurs now, so I think relations are better. But actually, it will probably be 10, 15 years after residents envisaged they would see that scheme come forward. So that's just a little bit of history. So I'm now obviously working at Tower Hamlets, as Nick said, and just to give you a bit of an overview of the borough, I think you will all know Tower Hamlets. You will all have spent time in the borough. You may not know all of Tower Hamlets, so just to give you a bit of a picture of the borough, the Tower of London is in Tower Hamlets, by the way. We held an event there last year, and lots of people who came said, "Oh, I thought it was in the city." It's not. It's in Tower Hamlets, and we're very proud of it. So we go from the west side in Tower Hamlets with the Tower of London. We've got Wapping, the City Fringe, Aldgate, Brick Lane, Banglatown. Very characterful, special parts of London that you will all know, I'm sure. I also think if you go right over to the eastern fringe of the borough, you will know that part as well. So we have quite a significant part of the Olympic Park is in Tower Hamlets, including some of the remaining developable land. We have Hackney Wick and Fish Island, and everyone thinks that's in Hackney, including myself, actually. When I was applying to go to Tower Hamlets, I didn't realise at the time until I did my research. Hackney Wick is in Tower Hamlets, including the station. Hackney Wick is in Tower Hamlets. So we have that part. We have Victoria Park, which has been voted the country's favourite park many, many times. And obviously, we have Canary Wharf, which is one of the reasons that we're the third biggest economy by local authority area in the UK. Only the City and Westminster are bigger than us, and really, I think a large part of that is, as you would expect, Canary Wharf. But we also have some amazing neighbourhoods, the Isle of Dogs, Whitechapel, Stepney. These are at Bethnal Green. These are all places that some of you will know, maybe not all, and they all make Tower Hamlets special. It is a series of hamlets, and it is a series of sort of urban villages, but together I think it makes a really special place. And we're the youngest borough in the country and the most densely populated borough in the country by some distance. So that's just, the other thing just to say is the Elizabeth line, we often talk about it being a game changer for London. People often think about the outer fringes that has connected into the city. It's been a massive game changer for Tower Hamlets because imagine, Whitechapel now is 4 minutes to Stratford. It's 10 minutes to the West End. It's 40 minutes to Heathrow Airport. That's transformational. And so I'll just mention that. Okay, we have lots of challenges, and these are the things that I'm sure you've spent time thinking about and talking about, but I suppose just things I wanted to mention. Viability, you can't go to a conference with housing developers at the moment without moans and groans about viability. It is tough to get stuff delivered at the moment. I think the main issue is stagnant demand for market housing. I was speaking to one developer last week and he said to me, the problem is if no one thinks they'll make any money from buying our flats, no one will buy our flats. And so there is a real issue around demand for market housing, which, by the way, is one of the reasons I'm quite critical of the government's emergency package to reduce the percentage of affordable housing and also have our borough sale rates arbitrarily, because actually I think it's the wrong solution to the problem. It doesn't solve the demand side issues. I don't know what needs to happen on that side, whether it's stamp duty relief, whether it's something like Help to Buy, but something needs to be done to help demand for housing. And at the moment, it's just not there. So when developers are building private housing, they're typically selling it to institutional investors for rent, which has got its place, by the way. But the trouble is there's only so much demand for that. So we do need that. The second part of it is the introduction of the building safety regulator, which, I mean, I also in my job, I am responsible for the management of 20,000 council homes. And the building safety regulator and the regulator of social housing are really good things and are raising standards. And clearly was required when you think about the tragedy of Grenfell. However, the building safety regulator has got targets to turn around their gateway applications, which every developer has to go through at various stages, including post-planning permission, within 12 weeks. A number are still taking over a year. This includes our own schemes as a council, actually, or if I want to do alterations to one of my existing buildings to improve the safety of them, we have to go through the building safety regulator if it's a high-rise building, and it's really significantly slowing down. And it's not just the time lost, it's the increase in uncertainty. And one of the things that investors and developers say to me is, if there are choices about where to put money, and the problem with the UK is even once you have planning consent, you still have a lot of risk that can last for over a year or 18 months. And so that's been a real issue. A number of other issues as well around things like the decent home standard now applying to private sector, which has meant that and also the Renters Reform Bill, which I think is a very good thing, by the way, but it has led to a lot of landlords, sort of amateur landlords, getting out. And that's reduced supply at the very time that we need supply for the increasing homelessness challenge that we've got. So I have to say, although, Nick and I were reflecting the last 20 years, it's felt like one crisis after another, Brexit, COVID. I've never quite known a set of circumstances like this one where it feels so challenging to get stuff delivered. So if I just go on, how are we responding to that? How are we looking to meet the challenge? I suppose the one thing about Tower Hamlets is we have very, very significant needs. We talk about 29,000 families on our housing waiting list. We talk about being the most overcrowded borough in the country. But we are leading the way in terms of building new homes. So we've built 38,000 homes since 2011. I say we, that's the private sector, that's housing associations, that's the council. Our current mayor our executive mayor has got big ambitions to build more council homes. He wants to build 4,000 by 2026 this year, the end of his term. And depends on your definition of built. We have definitely started more than 4,000, but we will take some time to complete. We've got a very ambitious direct delivery programme that we're doing as a council. So one of the big changes over my 25 years in local government is councils now build homes again. All the way through the Blair government, we weren't able to. And it was only the very tail end of the Brown government that councils could start building again. And I think that this has been a game changer. It really has, because councils have lots of land and we've been able to leverage in grant funding to build homes. So we're doing that in Tower Hamlets. We've got a very ambitious local plan, which I'll talk about. Also, one of the great things about Tower Hamlets, given the scale of development we've got, is we've had lots of income from Community Infrastructure Levy, Section 106, to invest in infrastructure. And we're really about investing, whether it's schools, new leisure centres, bridges to connect up disconnected places, we are investing in it. And we've been fortunate because of the income we've had from development that we're in a good position to do some of that in the way that other boroughs are perhaps not. So just to talk a little bit about meeting the challenge as well, we've just sort of launched a new kind of regeneration plan, and I'll talk about each of the main areas within that and what we're looking to do in the key places in Tower Hamlets that I spoke about. Not only are we the third largest economy in the UK, but we have the most productive workforce, which is quite an impressive statistic, and you can see the graph on the right that shows that. We are also, I mentioned that I manage the team that manages 20,000 council homes. It is badly in need of investment. And so we have been doing a lot of work to procure some partners to bring forward that investment in increasing our decent homes percentage, in dealing with the fire safety issues that we've got, improving energy efficiency, a massive retrofit programme, and we're going to invest about 600 million over 10 years. It's not easy, particularly because you have to recharge leaseholders and people don't like that, but it's something that's necessary. I think, I'm more of a planner by background, but as someone who has got into housing management in my career, I really feel that we are seeing the legacy of various governments underinvesting in social housing, rent caps and rent freezes, and all of the impact of that is now showing in terms of where a lot of councils are, including ourselves. We're also looking to invest in temporary accommodation. I'll say a little bit more about that and the scale of the challenge we've got around homelessness. So in fact, let's talk about that now. So just to give you some numbers, when people talk about the homelessness and temporary accommodation crisis, it is real, and it's one of the biggest pressures we face. We've had a 40% and more than 40% increase in demand for since the introduction of the Homelessness Reduction Act. Another piece of legislation, by the way, which I think is well-meaning and a very good thing, but it has increased pressure on local authorities substantially without any requisite funding. In fact, at a time that local authorities' funding has been severely restricted. We've now got a 28% increase in people living in TA. We've got over 3,000 families in temporary accommodation. I'm glad to say that we have none in bed and breakfast anymore. We ended that about a year ago, but we do still have people in insecure nightly paid accommodation. Only about 50% of those households are in borough. And I always say to people, like, think about the human impact of this. If we've placed a family in a nightly paid accommodation in Ilford and their kids go to school in Tower Hamlets, imagine the impact that has on your day-to-day life. And the overcrowding levels we have are really, really substantial. Quite often I visit private renter sector properties where the typical scene is a family of 8 in a 2-bed property, 3 kids in both bedrooms and the parents' bed in the living room. That's the reality of life for a lot of families in Tower Hamlets. So this is why we're so gung-ho about building housing and building family-sized housing, because we have to do something about that, because the impacts are real, from damp and mould through to the impact it has on mental health, educational attainment. It all links together, and so it feels like there's a real purpose to try and tackle this. It also, though, just to go to the latter part of the slide, it has a massive financial impact on the council. So we had an overspend of 27 million on temporary accommodation, and I'm just about to show you a graph. We call this the graph of doom. So this is basically showing you, so if you can, the red bars are what the situation will be in 28, 29 if trends continue as they are today. So I talked about, the 27 million overspend that we've just had on temporary accommodation. If demand continues to increase by 10% year on year, which it has over the last decade, if rents continue to go up way above inflation, which they have, then we will have over £40 million. And one of the reasons we have that overspend is that the subsidy that we get from the government is frozen at 2011 local housing allowance levels. And that means that that's been frozen whilst everything else has increased. And it has been a massive cost shunt from national to local government. And no government of any persuasion wants to do anything about that, because if they did, it would increase the benefits bill exponentially. And so that's actually, and I would say this, I've got a local authority hat on, it's easier to just shunt it to local authorities. But it's had massive consequences for local authority budgets, and is probably one of the 2 main reasons that there are something like 9 London boroughs who are basically bankrupt and have had to serve Section 114 notices, is because of temporary accommodation and adult social care increase. So what are we doing about it? We're doing a lot of work to acquire new properties. So we're buying back former council right to buy properties. We're trying to secure longer term leased accommodation, which is hard at a time when there's less private sector rented properties available, but we're doing everything we can to increase that so we can get out of expensive nightly paid accommodation. We've put a lot of investment in the last year to achieve that. So we're doing that. And we're doing a lot around trying to prepare for the Renters Reform Act, which is coming our way, and all of the additional requirements that will bring. But we're also trying to change the culture within our homelessness department. So we've talked about the fact that we need to have a trauma-informed approach to homelessness. People don't turn up and present as homelessness for the fun of it. There are often a whole multitude of different factors that have led to that family presenting as homeless. So we want to really kind of shift the investment so we're more preventative, and we're trying to deal with the issues and also work with landlords before they make households homeless. So we're doing a lot in that space, and just given time, I'll move on. I'm also going to speak a little bit about climate change and just how significant a factor that is for us at the moment. So the biggest risk we've got around housing delivery on the Isle of Dogs is that there needs to be a new electrical substation built, or else most of the homes will not receive power. I don't know if you followed as well, in recent times we've had huge issues with water pressure issues in London, and we are seeing real issues now of new developments being built and Thames Water not being able to supply water to those homes, or if they can supply water, it has a knock-on impact on the next door homes which suddenly experience water pressure issues. So there's a huge challenge in London around basic infrastructure planning. But one of the things we are looking at with the government having heat network zones is how do we draw from things like data centres or the sewage treatment plant in Beckton on a sort of sub-regional basis to serve some of that infrastructure requirements that we've got. And we're doing some really interesting work there, but it comes with lots of risk. Who takes the risk on? Who puts the investment in? Is it local authorities? Is it the private sector? What risk does that imply later on for customers? So it's a really complicated area. We have done lots to reduce our carbon footprint as a council. So we have achieved a 60% reduction since we declared a climate emergency for a whole range of measures, which I think is impressive. One of the big things we did was our new town hall project, and it's amazing. It's a REBA prize-winning sort of development in the heart of Whitechapel. But apart from being an impressive building and a great place to work, it's vastly reduced our carbon emissions. And we've got out of other buildings, and I'll show you one of them upcoming, which has helped hugely. But one of the reasons we've been able to really invest in this area is we have a carbon offset fund mechanism where we've secured just short of £40 million from developments that aren't able to meet their requirements on site. And then we've invested it, in everything from air source heat pumps to transitioning our council fleet, for instance, so that it is more fuel efficient. And these numbers, they may or may not sound impressive to people, but they're much bigger than any other council I've worked for because the scale of development and the scale of money we've been able to collect through our carbon offset fund. Just to talk about planning briefly, we have got a really ambitious local plan. We've just submitted it to the Secretary of State, so we'll be having our inspection later in the summer. It includes site allocations for the delivery of 52,000 homes over a 15-year period. We have had to really work hard to get to this place because we've had a number of interactions with people like English Heritage, the GLA. What are the impacts of taller buildings on things like the Tower of London, the UNESCO World Heritage discussion that goes on. I was talking to colleagues from Liverpool last week about the journey they've been on with UNESCO. We're having similar discussions in the City of London are too. We're really ambitious. We want to build the homes that we feel we need to tackle the challenges I've described, but it does have a lot of knock-on impacts that we need to think through and work through. We think we've done it in quite a considered way with our local plan. We've got a great evidence base, but that's all going to be tested, so watch this space. As I mentioned, councils now build homes. I think that's great. We built over 1,000 whilst I was at Haringey and similar numbers at Camden, and both of those councils have got ambitions to do more. One thing I would observe, though, is that in Haringey, when I worked there, virtually the only development that was happening at the end was council homes because of the issues around the private market I mentioned earlier, and that's dependent on large injections of grant from the Greater London Authority and Homes England. So we're doing it in Tower Hamlets, and just to give you a couple of examples, so we're doing a big estate regeneration scheme in it's actually in Stepney. Which is the one you can see on screen, the Harriet, Ainsley and Patterson scheme. So we're going to be replacing 100 ageing properties which would have had huge investment need to make them decent, and replace them with around 400 homes. Someone once told me the rule of thumb with estate regeneration is you need to treble the density to make it work in viability terms. Well, we're going beyond that here. I think the other great thing about these schemes is actually the investment you can put into social infrastructure. So we're replacing the Redcoat Community Centre and Mosque with a brand new facility you can see bottom right that we've developed with the mosque. and with the community hub. And I think this is going to be transformational. But every good estate regeneration scheme or big regeneration scheme I've worked on has got social infrastructure as part of it. I mean, one of the lovely things about King's Cross, to go back to that example, is there's 2 schools in King's Cross, which brings a different type of life to Google or Facebook, but it's all part of the experience. So I think community infrastructure is always critical, and it's critical to winning resident support for these schemes as well. Another one, so this one, I mentioned we've come out of inefficient offices and moved into Whitechapel Town Hall. This one is Albert Jacob House, and it was our former homelessness office, and we are going to replace it with 53 social rented homes. I cannot think of a better example of a former homelessness office. It's just off Roman Road in Bethnal Green. And again, you know, as well as the funding we get from the GLA, we've recently been awarded some brownfield land release funding from MHCLG. So there's always a sort of cocktail of funding you need to sort of put together to make schemes viable and to get the business cases to work. And this is a good example of this, but I think it's a really lovely scheme. And then just to say, I don't know if any of you are Bronski Beat fans, but the St George's Leisure Centre was featured in one of their videos. The existing one, it's actually a lovely leisure centre. I feel quite sad about the fact we're going to demolish it, but the amount of investment it needed to bring it up to today's standards just made it unviable. And also, although you always get into the carbon debate around is it better to demolish or to work with the existing building, but I think when you looked at the whole life cycle, we really realised we had to, with this one, replace it. So what we're doing is we're building a new facility that will have wet and dry facilities, but also 30 new social rented homes. So we're working the site far harder, we're improving the leisure offering, and that one has recently got consent of planning, and we're just procuring a construction partner for it. So I suppose my message is that councils, not just Tower Hamlets, are really using our land to leverage housing delivery, and especially at a time that the market has slightly retreated. We want to go further though, so we are looking now at bringing forward the next tranche of our own land. So we've done work to bring 46 new sites forward, and we're investing in all the planning and architecture and sort of early phases feasibility work to bring those sites forward. It's everything from our council depot in Blackwall, which could, if we can find a new site for the depot, which is quite a big if, could deliver 800 homes. So that's an example of the scale we're looking at. And we are looking to bring in some development partners to help deliver all of that. These are all the consultants we're working with. So I suppose, again, it's back to the partnership point. Councils back in the day, I'm told, had architects departments and a lot of this resource in-house. It's not really how we tend to work now, and we tend to bring in that expertise. And then, you know, we have in-house project managers who client manage it all and direct it all, but we do bring that expertise in. So yeah, I mentioned that we've just launched our Future Places plan. So this is really about just trying to provide a single view of where are the big catalytic opportunities in Tower Hamlets as we move forward. It's a borough that's been through so much change. I acknowledge that. You know, I'm just the latest person who's lucky enough to work there on some amazing projects and places. But there's still a lot of opportunity. There's still a lot to do in Tower Hamlets, as someone said to me when I joined. So just to think briefly about Canary Wharf, actually Sarah Carey, who now works for Imperial College, was here at the start, popped in to say hello, but she went to Canary Wharf last weekend and was amazed at how much life there is on a weekend. It's so different to what I remember, say 20 years ago, when it more or less died outside of working hours. They've really tried to make it more of a destination. Things like the Troubadour Theatre. If you go to Canary Wharf now on the weekend, between Hunger Games kicking out the matinee and the evening arriving, it is a hub of activity. The restaurant scene is thriving, but they've also got some big new occupiers moving in. So Deutsche Bank, for instance, Visa, and also UCL have got their business school in Canary Wharf. So it's becoming a much more kind of, it's no longer just financial services. There's a big life sciences building being built there. And so I think it's really diversifying. There's great public art. There's the Eden project that's activated the docks. So I would just say to you, like, definitely go down there. But one of the things is that a lot of the buildings that were built in the 90s and 80s are at the end of their useful life. So things like the HSBC building, the Canary Wharf Group are having to think about how do you repurpose that building. They're definitely not looking to demolish. The business case doesn't stack up for that. So how do you repurpose a building built for a certain purpose? Big trading floors are apparently no longer a thing now. You know, the way that organisations work is so different. So there's so much change happening. So Canary Wharf is really interesting. The other thing to note about Canary Wharf is it is a place now where people live. So the Wood Wharf development, which is home to 3,500 homes, a new school, which actually we've built as the council, lots of community facilities, some affordable retail that we negotiated as well, where 8 Tower Hamlets businesses have moved in and basically received shops on a rent-free basis for 10 years. There's a real sense of vibrancy now, and I think having that community that lives there is another thing that drives the activity at all times of the week. So very interesting. I encourage you to get down to Canary Wharf. Recently as well, something very significant happened. JP Morgan have announced that they're going to build the biggest office building in Europe on a large vacant site on the riverside at Canary Wharf, which they own. They were choosing between ourselves, the City of London, and Paris. It was quite we had to really do the hard sell to get them to choose Tower Hamlets and make a number of commitments about how we'll work with them. They've got big ambition. Not only to build their office building, but also to create a new Thames side park, which will deck over the nearby road and kind of connect the station up with the Thames. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity. And as soon as that announcement happened, a number of other occupiers started taking space. So these things they do have a catalytic effect. Okay, I've only got about 10 minutes left, you'll be glad to hear. So also, though, when I went recently to a meeting Canary Wharf Group had with the local community, so from the Isle of Dogs, from Poplar, and a number of the residents who came to that, they have a good relationship with Canary Wharf, actually, and Canary Wharf work quite hard with the local community. But there is still that sense of, is this for us? What is here for us? And I think one of the reasons for that is that it's still quite disconnected from the surrounding places, and one of our big opportunities is what we define as South Poplar. So if you go over to the other side of Aspen Way, there's a very inhospitable pedestrian bridge for people that know it at the moment. There's quite a lot of potential land that may be brought forward. The DLR depot, for instance, Docklands Light Railway, they have their depot there. There's a college, have land there. The council has various land holdings as well. And we're looking at, can we bring that forward and really properly deck over Aspen Way so that we can connect in Poplar to Canary Wharf, and it can feel much more like one place. It's probably one of the biggest opportunities we've got. So we're working on that with all the landowners. Also, you may have followed this whole thing around the City of London is getting out of wholesale markets. So one of them is Billingsgate, which is the fish market. They have agreed to move, along with the meat market, from the city to a new site in the Royal Docks in Newham. We jointly own the site with the City of London, so we're looking at how we can bring forward a development there, and that is very much part of that South Poplar work that we talked about. It's probably one of our biggest opportunities. And, in one way, this is driven by a significant piece of deregulation, because at the moment, these wholesale markets can only happen on these sites by an act of Parliament. But the city are taking a bill through Parliament that will change that and will basically allow people to do wholesale activity anywhere. So it's quite a significant move, frees up a site in Tower Hamlets. Right, I mentioned Hackney Wick and Fish Island. I don't know if people have been there recently, but it has transformed. It's such a hive of activity. There's lots of significant kind of cultural institutions in this area, and so that's one of the reasons that we applied for and got Creative Enterprise Zone funding from the Greater London Authority, and we're working with businesses there, and we've seen a 64% increase in creative jobs since the establishment of that fund. It's a really interesting area, and I think it kind of works quite well alongside the big institutions on the Olympic Park, including UCL actually. So I think this is kind of the other side of the coin, the kind of supply chain, the smaller institutions, things like the Yard Theatre. It's a really interesting area, and I would definitely recommend people get there. But there's lots of housing being built as well, so it does feel like a construction site at the moment. But I think you can really get a sense of place coming, and there's a number of creative and cultural institutions moving into the area. The Lower Lea Valley, I didn't really know much about this till I got to Tower Hamlets. This is one of the parts of Tower Hamlets I didn't know, but if you come in the A12 towards the Blackwall Tunnel, it's everything to the east. So the Aberfeldy Estate, which is Poplarharca, as an example. With the land on our side and also on Newham's side of the River Lea, there's actually the potential for 40,000 new homes, which is London's biggest opportunity area. It's very disconnected though. There is a bridge every 200 metres now in the Olympic Park, largely thanks to the investment put in the Olympics. But in this stretch of the River Lea, there is no crossing for 1.2 miles. So, sorry, 1.2 kilometres. So one of the things we're doing is putting a bridge in. We've agreed a funding package with Newham and the GLA. It's funded from some of the big developments like the Barclay Homes scheme at Poplar Riverside. So we're really trying to address that area being quite disconnected. We're looking at how do you improve things like cycle routes, so that there are east-west cycle routes, and we're doing some really interesting work there, but also delivering a lot of homes to tackle some of the problems I mentioned earlier. Almost there. Whitechapel. So this is very much the heart of the borough. It's very interesting that the council made the decision to move from the Blackwall area to Whitechapel, and we are now based in the former Royal London Hospital. And it's interesting because when members of the community come in or we interview people for jobs or whatever it might be, they always say, "Oh yeah, this is where I gave birth," or this is where I had to come for an operation, or I recognise that operating theatre that we're now sitting in as a meeting room. So, but it was a really conscious decision by this mayor, although delivered by the previous mayor, and now this mayor is back, to move the council into Whitechapel. And that's had a big impact. And we're also doing a number of other projects, investing in the market, the shop fronts, and there's a real... Whitechapel is one of those places that feels genuinely unique to me and doesn't feel like it's gone the way of a number of places in London. It doesn't feel gentrified, and I think that's what makes it special. One of the other things that's coming is probably the largest life sciences cluster in London. So when I was at Haringey, people used to say, "Should we have a life sciences cluster in Haringey? That seems to be where everyone's going now." And I used to say, we don't have any of the fundamentals, but we do in Tower Hamlets because we have QMU, Queen Mary University, and we have the largest teaching hospital in the country, and we've got Canary Wharf nearby. So when you put all those things together, we're really with the Elizabeth line, we've become a really attractive location for this type of investment. And we recently gave consent to the largest scheme in terms of life sciences in London, and that is now been led by QMU, who have acquired all the land, and they'll bring forward other future phases of that. I think it will really transform Whitechapel and make it much more of a place to work as well as a place to live and visit. Okay, so I think, sorry, I've gone backwards. Finally, just the city fringe, I just mentioned, I think there's a number of, so Brick Lane is really special. It's a very contested place. We've recently had a big public inquiry on the Truman Brewery site, where there's a proposal for a large data centre and a kind of shopping arcade and a very limited amount of residential development that the council was not happy with. And we have contested that scheme at a public inquiry. We felt it was going quite well for us, but it's been taken over by the Secretary of State, Steve Reid, so we're now in his hands. We will see what happens, and obviously his mantra is build, baby, build, so I suspect that might be going in one direction. However, I still think, despite those schemes which we don't think contribute, but there's a lot of really interesting things happening in the area that do build on its special character, and we are building more housing in the area as well, where we've got really significant... This is where overcrowding is most pronounced, and we're doing things to address that. But the other thing I just wanted to mention here is there's a lot of kind of 1980s, 90s office buildings that would take too much investment for them to be relet as offices, given the new environmental standards. And so a lot of them are being changed to things like hotels and complementary uses to the city next door. So a lot of change in that area. And we have also seen the city kind of spill out into the old gate part of Tower Hamlets, and we've got quite a cluster of big employers there now as well. And that is definitely different to when I first came to London. So finally, it is my final slide. I suppose just to say, I'm just going to end with this image. This is the Poplar Riverside development in the Lee Side area. It's 2,700 homes. And just to go full circle, the council has just agreed to purchase 230 of the social rented homes in the scheme. Now, we've done that because we get 230 amazing council homes, and over half of them are family size, 3 and 4 bed homes. So it's a great deal for us, and we're getting a lot of grant to do it. Fantastic. Thank you to the Greater London Authority. But it also is helping get the wider scheme delivered, because Barclay Homes have been clear that without this deal, the scheme would probably be put on hold for 3 or 4 years. But instead of that, they are then cash flowing other phases of the scheme to come forward now, so we get earlier delivery of housing. So I think, like, for me, the full circle moment is, you know, King's Cross needed the public sector at certain phases to keep it going, and I'm seeing that again today with councils quite often acquiring and cash flowing schemes. I suspect there's a limit to how much we can do, and we have to get that market working again, or else things will grind to a halt. You will all know that the government has this 1.5 million homes target, and they are so far off it is untrue. In fact, starts have nosedived in London. So we need to be more creative than ever. We probably need to do things like we've done at Poplar Riverside, but because of the scale of demand and need that we've got in Tower Hamlets, we're definitely in the game and want to be part of that, because ultimately, you know, we're thinking about those communities who are so under pressure and those people who are living in overcrowded homes. And also, we're seeing the placemaking benefits of schemes like this, you know, opening up the River Lee with new cycle routes. And, you know, also the residents on the Aberfeldy estate with that bridge will now have a pleasant walk to Canning Town Tube Station once that bridge goes in. If any of you have done that walk at the moment, it is not a pleasant walk from the Aberfeldy estate to Canning Town. You have to walk along an underpass, up and over. This is going to really transform that. So I think, for me, you know, there's an imperative to get these things done, not only to build homes, but to really improve people's lives and places. Hopefully that's what we're all about, but it's not easy. So that's it, and I think I've come in on time, Nick.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. We have an opportunity now to ask David any questions that you might have. I will start just with a very minor one. You mentioned the buyback of local authority homes.
Yes.
So the strategy with that is sell low, buy high. I noted there's an article in the Big Issue, I think a few months ago, saying that this was a very expensive thing for local authorities to do, but you didn't really have any choice. You need those homes back. Are your current crop of council homes protected from the right to buy?
So, I mean, first of all, it's a very good question. And I get the point, it is a bit galling, actually, because, you know, we probably sold them at a massive discount, and we're buying them back at, say, you know, a 2-bed in Stepney for £400,000. So you might think, are you mad? I would say no council probably asked for right to buy, but it was imposed on us by the then national government. But actually, it still makes massive sense, because buying a flat in Stepney for £400,000 is much cheaper than any other option I've got to house families in temporary accommodation. We do get grant from the GLA again to help subsidise the cost that we pay, although that's still public money, but that's helpful to us. But as I say, if I compare the cost, so the borrowing that we then need to do to buy those homes and the cost of servicing that is way cheaper than expensive nightly paid accommodation, than going out and getting private rented sector flats on longer term leases, or any other option I've got. So we are really keen on acquisitions, as much as I do personally find it a little bit galling for the reasons that you've set out. But we're out there, and we bought over 200 in the last couple of years, and we want to do more in that space, because the mathematics of it work. But also, we've then got control on that. And it means, so just to give you one, sorry to just give another human impact story. I was talking to our head director of homelessness yesterday. She made the point to me that there are some families in temporary accommodation that we've had to move 10 times because of the insecure nature of the accommodation. With those buybacks, we've got it. And so if that family does sadly have to stay in TA for 5-10 years, they'll be in that one property, providing it still meets their needs. So it's more secure for them, and it's in Tower Hamlets, which is a big political priority. Because at the moment, you know, we have to send people to Peterborough, we have to send people to Ilford, we have to send people to all sorts of places within the South East. We're not one of those councils that go as far as the Northwest or Northeast, but we do send pretty much anywhere within the South East, and we have to, because we've got that statutory duty to house them.
Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, sorry, the other bit. So no, the current stock. Well, obviously, Angela Rayner, in one of her last acts as Deputy Prime Minister, she's significantly reduced the discount that you can get if you want to buy your own property. So we can't stop right to buy. I mean, actually, in Tower Hamlets, 50% of our stock is leasehold. That's the highest of anywhere I've worked. And you know, a lot of people that I speak, that they are members of the community who are very proud that they were able to buy their own home. You know, it's not all buy-to-let investors, so it's not always that kind of. But what we saw, unfortunately, with the discount being reduced was we got 1,400 applications before the deadline. I don't know why, in their wisdom, they decided to give people notice that they were going to, but they did. And surprise, surprise, we got 1,400 applications. So actually, that will probably change the balance again in our stock. So we're now about 55% leasehold. In terms of new build, there is a protection. I've forgotten how long it is for the first 5 years or something like that, where they can't do right to buy. But beyond that, they can.
Thank you. My question is about density. We're seeing increasing density in many of the developments you showed us pictures of. I was recently at Tottenham Hale, and I was stunned at the density of development that has occurred there. You can see the economic reasons for that, but do you think there's a limit to what's an acceptable density for new developments?
Yes, of course, there has to be a limit. I mean, and obviously I was involved in quite a bit of the Tottenham Hale stuff that you mentioned. Although, again, I mean, I don't want to do the disclaimer of it wasn't my fault, Gov, but a lot of the time these things are decided a long, long time ago, and things like these sort of opportunity area planning frameworks. I actually think quite often high density works really well because it actually frees up space, public space, and I actually think that there's some parts of Tottenham Hale work really well. Because of that, some parts of it are still under construction. So things like the new public square that's going to be built at the heart of Tottenham Hale have not yet come on stream. So I would say give it a bit of time, go back there when it's completed and maybe judge it then and only then. But yes, I think there has to be a limit. And one of the things that everyone says about King's Cross is, you know, actually largely they stuck to the plan. I don't think if it was planned today it would look like that. Just go around London, but it's probably one of the biggest success factors. So I think there does have to be constraints, but it is really difficult because it comes back sometimes to the viability equation. And as I said, I've never known an estate regeneration scheme to work unless you treble the density. So the only other options a council will have, or a landlord will have, is to find the money to invest in existing buildings, and often that is completely uneconomical. So I realise that these choices aren't easy, but yeah, there definitely have to be choices. But high density with good planning can be done well. I think, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing, and there's lots of good examples of it.
Thanks, David. It's a great presentation. My question is about leasehold reform. You mentioned yourself there's lots of great things happening. Clearly, we've got government saying build, baby, build, but housing starts have fallen off a cliff. Huge demand for housing. The market for flats is not good. We talk about house prices and rent rises, but we don't talk about service charges, which I think have gone up something like 40% in the last 5 years. You mentioned improving housing stock and major works that then you have to pass on to leaseholders. Yeah. Is there something just intrinsically bad about the leasehold model that's putting people applying flats? And how important is leasehold reform and the bill that's coming through at the moment?
I think I mean, I don't have the answers to all of these questions. They're good questions. But I would say on the sort of premise of your question, it is one of the big factors that's constraining demand, is the potential for service charges to escalate. I mean, I was talking to someone about Elephant and Castle recently, who told me that they bought a two-bed flat there, and when they moved in, the service charge was in the region of £250 a month, and it's already escalated within 10 years to £700 a month. And so you can see why, for many people, that's completely unaffordable. And that's if you've managed to save up the money to buy a very expensive flat in the first place. So I think there are real issues. I would rather have the council as my landlord in that situation than lend lease, if I'm allowed to say that, because I think councils are, partly because we're democratically accountable, keenly, we don't always get it right, by the way, and there's examples of leasehold bills that have got very high, but I think we're always very aware and trying to work out how do we keep the costs down. When we buy like homes in the Poplar Riverside development, and this may also be controversial, but I'll just say it anyway, our residents will not have access to all the services in that development. They won't have access to the swimming pool. They won't have access to some of the cinema rooms and things like that, because the service charge implications would just be too high. So we go for a much more basic type of service that we provide. And for us, that then keeps the cost down and keeps it affordable. But we will pay into, say, the estate charges so that residents still have access to the new parks and play spaces and things like that, obviously. But what they won't have access to is some of the more expensive. So in terms of the whole leasehold reform question, I think it is, I mean, I'm watching this space as much as anyone in the room as to what impacts they have. The one thing that slightly concerns me is if we get it too wrong in the other direction, we constrain the supply of private rental sector accommodation. It then causes me a problem with my homelessness, because a lot of the households we're placing, if they're not our properties that we've acquired, they're in the private rental sector. And one of the things that's pushed up the cost is, with the Renters Reform Bill coming, a lot of landlords have just got out. They've just said, actually, we don't want all that regulation. It's too complicated. It's too expensive. And that's then meant constrained supply, and it pushes costs up. So I'm afraid I'm a bit schizophrenic on the topic.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you think the Labour government has done much to support local councils with house building since 2024? And is there anything that you'd like to see from central government in terms of supporting local councils with house building?
So, yes, I actually think they have. And in some ways, some of the things they've done are quite unglamorous. So things like they've provided a 10-year rent settlement for local authorities, where they've said you will be able to increase rents year on year by CPI plus 1%. But having that certainty for 10 years is massive, because it allows us to do the investment planning that comes back to, we're now putting a lot of investment into our stock. I'm afraid under the previous government, we were only getting 1 year settlements each time, and often they were telling us what the settlement was in February, and we had to issue the rent letters in March for April. How do you do any investment planning on that basis? Because no finance director is going to turn around and say, yes, David, go away and spend money on the stock when I don't know what income we're going to be getting. So they've done things like that. And actually, things like that don't cost the government anything. They just provide certainty. They have also, and I would credit Angela Rayner for this, because I think she, at the time, was powerful within government. She got a very good settlement for grant funding, and London has done quite well out of that. And that is now leading to some really good discussions around a scalable kind of programme of delivery for councils and registered landlords. So I think they've done those things which have been good. Could they do more? Yes. Could grant rates be higher to get more done? Absolutely. Could they do some stuff to do the demand management side, stamp duty relief, or help to buy for first-time buyers? I think they need to be in that space and thinking about it quite substantially. I'm going to be balanced. I do think this emergency package of measures they brought in is deeply damaging. It reduces the affordable percentage even in schemes that are viable, which to me is madness. It's also having the SIL funding we receive, which means we can't invest in some of the social infrastructure that I talked about. But the final thing I'd say on government is I would really want them to do more in the homelessness space. This thing about freezing, and again, it might sound a bit technical, but freezing the local housing allowance at 2011 levels is a huge cost shunt onto local authorities, which are already strained beyond the point of coming back. I mean, look at places like Croydon and some of the outer London boroughs that are basically having to issue Section 114 notices. A large part of that is temporary accommodation, and successive governments don't want to address it because they don't want I assume they don't want to deal with the resulting impact on the benefits bill. But I think we're just burying our head in the sand. So I've tried to be I've tried to be a bit balanced there.
Thank you, David. Quick question on the office developments. City of London, within their planning framework, make sure it must have community spaces now in those office developments. 63 St Mary's Axe is probably the best I've seen as part of a blueprint, really, a template for it. They have to have a rooftop bar or a restaurant. And going back to the lady's point and going back to your point, the footprint is slimmer on 63 St Mary's Axe. It's gone taller. But they're building a park all the way around that. And that's just off London Wall. Within your planning framework, are you just allowing office blocks just to be built? Or are you going to make sure that they will not get planning unless they put community spaces within that office block?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think the first thing to say is in a lot of the office market in Tower Hamlets is very strained, and particularly in the city fringe area, we're not seeing any applications for new office buildings really because it's just not viable in the way that it is in the city. In Canary Wharf we are, but Canary Wharf liked taking a statewide approach because actually Canary Wharf are putting a lot of investment into public spaces and parks at ground floor level. I just mentioned JP Morgan. They're really trying to get cars, make it less car dominated. One of the things about Canary Wharf is it's actually remarkable how it was designed around the car, even though it was relatively recent. And so I think the focus there is more on that. So we don't currently have that City of London approach. I think the city probably are a bit fortunate that, you know, the demand there is much higher. I do like about it. I've been to some of the spaces they've created. I think it's wonderful. But we haven't done that in Tower Hamlets. But you've triggered a thought for me to speak to my policy team and ask them why, because I haven't explored that topic since I've been there. So yeah, thank you.
One, congratulations. I think your presentation as a Director of Regeneration, Housing, Planning, and probably half the rest of the council is world class. There aren't many directors that could tell the story that you've told. It raises in my mind two questions. One, as a local authority, Tower Hamlets does not get a good press. If you ask the average Guardian or Telegraph reader what they thought about Tower Hamlets as a local authority, it wouldn't remotely capture the strengths of what you're doing today. Related, but as a separate issue, Tower Hamlets is one of the most ethnically diverse, culturally diverse local authorities in Britain. You hardly mentioned or referred to that at all. Was there a reason for that?
No. So thank you for the praise, but I think you've just highlighted a key point that I should have said, which I didn't say. So I absolutely did mean to say that. In fact, when I was running through the presentation with my team, I asked for some content on that to go in, and I think it was missed out, and it shouldn't be, because it's absolutely central to what makes Tower Hamlets special. And you're right, we've got the largest Bengali population in the country. You know, it is an extremely diverse local authority, and we talk about it being our greatest strength all of the time. And actually, one of the things about Tower Hamlets, which is different for me to somewhere like Haringey and Tottenham, is the strength from to me anyway. It's a less transient community. It's a community that's more embedded in the place. I mean, Haringey's also got some really strong communities, but there are parts of it where there's a lot of churn in the council housing stock that we don't see in Tower Hamlets. So I think that's a real strength. And, you know, whichever part of Tower Hamlets you go to, there is a really active and vocal community who are willing to get involved in, willing to see, to get involved in shaping their places. And actually, the one thing I'd say is they are pro-development. I haven't come across NIMBYs in Tower Hamlets. I have virtually everywhere else I've ever worked. And, you know, being a NIMBY is not a bad thing, if that's your view. But actually, in Tower Hamlets, they come up to me and say, we need you to build more. We need you to get on with it. The need here is so great. That genuinely is the kind of conversation I have more often than not. In terms of what you said about the reputation of Tower Hamlets, yeah, I mean, I'm relatively new to Tower Hamlets, so I don't come at it with lots of baggage. I think a lot of the press we get is really unfair. I think we've got Ofsted outstanding for our children's services. We've just had a good rating in our CQC inspection. You know, we've got an excellent planning department that's well performing by any standards. We deliver lots of housing. You know, we do some great initiatives around tackling poverty. You know, so we've got a winter fuel allowance, which we put in when that was taken away by the government. Free school meals for secondary and primary school children, the only council in the country that do that. We have education maintenance allowance for young Tower Hamlets children that want to go to university. I could go on and on and on. And so I think there's a lot to be proud of at Tower Hamlets. My own view is that a lot of the negative press is a kind of reaction to the political situation and the fact that one of the main parties is not in power. Maybe I've gone native, I don't know, but I personally find it to be an incredible place to work where we do good things. And I think some of the press we get is unfair. Not all of it, like all councils, we get things wrong. And, you know, we have to hold our hands up. But I've not been at a council that doesn't get things wrong. But when you get things wrong at Tower Hamlets, yes, it's in the Guardian and it's in the Evening Standard. When I got things wrong in other councils, it wasn't. So that's kind of my take. But I'm probably not objective. So I suppose it's debate amongst yourselves.
Thanks very much for the presentation. It's good to see this from the inside, how it actually works from the borough. We work in Canary Wharf. It wasn't listed in the list, by the way. European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I guess I've got two questions. They're broader questions. The first one is, Canary Wharf is a particular type of development, highly private-led, as you know, a huge area. If you had to do that again, do you think that that's the right way to go in terms of development? That would be one question. And the other one is, thinking about the relationship with boroughs around Tower Hamlets and the fact that development is maybe not just a point, but it's broader than that. How would you describe your relationship with boroughs around Tower Hamlets? Is there you know, between competition and cooperation? Is it, if you put cooperation on a 1 and competition on a 10, where would you be on that graph? Thanks.
The first part of your question is really difficult to answer, and I don't want to sidestep it, but and be interested to know others' views. But there is no doubt that Canary Wharf was catalytic for East London, and obviously everyone knows the history of the London Docklands Development Corporation, a very specific type of government intervention that led to the Canary Wharf we have today. If we were doing it again, would I want it to be more integrated with the surrounding communities? Absolutely. Would I want less private land? Well, yes, because going back to my King's Cross example, I always thought King's Cross was really successful until I walked around with the young people and heard their views, and they said, we'll never come here. There's security guards that move us on. This doesn't feel like it's for us. You know, so I've got, you know, seeing it through those eyes, I have different views on that subject now. So yes, I possibly would do it differently. I definitely would plan it less around the car. And by the way, even King's Cross has a multi-storey car park which is sitting there empty, because when that scheme was designed, they assumed people would have to drive there in order to go shopping or go to restaurants, and you know, that's a complete nonsense, as we know today. So I think lots that you would potentially change, but you know, people have said the Olympic Games wouldn't have happened without Canary Wharf. You know, the Docklands Light Railway, you know, did Canary Wharf happen because of the Docklands Light Railway, or did Docklands Light Railway happen because of Canary Wharf? Did the Jubilee Line extension happen without Canary Wharf? No, it wouldn't have happened without Canary Wharf. So I think it's a really difficult question to answer. I think overall, London's change and shift eastwards is in large part down to Canary Wharf. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess I'll leave to people more clever than me to decide. And your second part of your question about neighbouring boroughs, I think it's really high on the cooperation front. So we're part of something called Central London Forward, which is all the Central London boroughs, and we're a big part of that partnership. We're also part of the London Legacy Development Corporation, which we work with Newham, with Hackney and Waltham Forest, and we work really well with those boroughs on a kind of growth economic partnership. I think there's a lot more to work together on. If you take something like Billingsgate, Newham found the site for the market to relocate to. That's really helpful. We then get a site that's freed up. So I don't necessarily think we're in competition. On something like JP Morgan, we were definitely in competition. The city wanted them, we wanted them. But having said that, the demand in the city is infinite, so they won't struggle to find something instead of JP Morgan. So I don't ultimately feel, I think there is a place for both. I prefer the kind of tall poppy strategy. If the city's successful, it pulls Canary Wharf up. If Canary Wharf's successful, it forces the city to improve its game. And I think like the last 20, 30 years in London would suggest that that philosophy has worked quite well, because I think it's undeniable both places are thriving. Perhaps Canary Wharf had a bit of a dip 5 to 10 years ago, but I think it's on the way back.
I think it's all well and good talking about Canary Wharf, which is great, but I think it doesn't take away from the fact that Tower Hamlets is, if not the most, one of the most deprived boroughs in Tower Hamlets. I was just wondering what level of housing is going towards social housing, and then also on top of that, what type of housing is being built? Is it more build to rent? Is it like what percentage would be privately owned? Because sometimes if that's not taken into consideration, the inequality in the borough can also be reflected in the housing and then push people out.
Well, I mean, what you've described is why we're so focused on social rented housing and building family-sized housing, and we're building thousands of social rented homes. It's going to take a lot, though, to address the fact we've got 29,000 families on the waiting list. So I'm doubtful we're ever going to get to the point where we can build enough homes that we won't have that type of list. But we're doing all we can. We've got 3,000 families in temporary accommodation. You're right around, and I probably should have said more about that as well. Apologies. I was speeding myself through it a little bit because I'm not used to doing lecturing, so apologies if I've missed bits. But I mean, some of the statistics are really stark around inequality in Tower Hamlets, and I think that is why the council is so focused on our priority is social rented housing. We get a lot of developers coming in to build student housing, co-living. We're not keen on it. But what we will say is if you can build in a lot of social rented housing as part of the scheme, we'll entertain a discussion with you. If all you want to do is student housing or co-living, then we're not going to encourage you. We're okay with private renter sector, institutional housing, if it helps deliver the social rented housing. So it's all kind of a means to an end for us. And that comes back to the level of need we've got. But also we're building council homes on our own land, and virtually, the large percentage of homes we're building on our own land. The other great thing we've got in Tower Hamlets is big registered providers. So we've got Poplar Harcourt, we've got East End Homes, we've got L&Q, we've got Clarion. They're all developing on their land as well. And that's different because unfortunately in Haringey and some other places I've worked, the viability meant housing associations were not building there. They are building in Tower Hamlets. So although we've got really extreme needs, I think we've got more opportunity than most to do something about it. I suppose that's what I'd say in answer to that question. Yeah, you're right to raise that, and it is our number one priority. If something isn't going to deliver against that agenda, we're probably not going to give you a very good hearing.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much for allowing us to grill you for the last half an hour. I think we'll draw things to a close, but thank you again for spending this evening with us and delivering such a comprehensive lecture. I feel I suddenly know Tower Hamlets much better and its various challenges. So if we can just thank David again for his talk.